In addition to that, I do teach online. So I have a bunch of courses on platforms like Udemy and Skillshare. And then the third thing I do is I create content. I think that's what you saw. Recently, I've been really super active on both TikTok and YouTube.
Today, I get to speak with Ali Mirza. I met him on TikTok and I was like, I really want to talk to this guy. He's the CEO and founder of iSocialU, a digital marketing agency based in Dallas, Texas. In the last 10 years, Ali has developed digital marketing solutions and growth hacking strategies for several mega brands, SMBs, startups, and agencies. At iSocialU, he helps brands with two important aspects of digital marketing. Number one, how to build the right type of audience. Number two, how to generate leads and revenue using Facebook ads and digital creative strategies. So let's dig into this episode and speak with Ali Mirza. Thank you for tuning in to Hacks and Hobbies with your host, Junaid. We're visited by our amazing guests coming from all walks of life. Want to learn their story, their struggles, and their journey on how they got to where they are today. So stick around. Hey Ali, thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I think we've been connected on Facebook for a while and TikTok. So yeah, happy to be here.
Absolutely. So what's really crazy, Ali, is how TikTok has totally changed the social media platform in the past 18 months. I mean, it wasn't even on the radar for a lot of people. It was initially called Musical.ly, and I think Gary Vaynerchuk mentioned it. And then they changed the name, and like all the rest is history.
Yep.
So tell us, a little bit about your background and how you got started in the social media and all of it. Like, what's your expertise and all those fun things?
Yes. So I'll try to keep it brief, and then we can, dig deep into anything that you like. So I run a social agency called iSocialU, work with a lot of clients. Anything under the umbrella of social media. So think of strategy, think of execution, think of Facebook ads. That's what we do. Basically, I tell people we act as fractional CMOs for businesses. So someone who can come in and look at your business and understand what your business is, who's your audience, and then what channels you need to use, how much budget you need to use if you have ads. So that's like what we do. In addition to that, I do teach online. So I have a bunch of courses on platforms like Udemy and Skillshare. And then the third thing I do is I create content. I think that's what you saw. Recently, I've been really super active on both TikTok and YouTube. So that's the current state of like my Ali's world.
Yeah.
My background is I'm from Pakistan. I moved here 9 days before 9/11 in 2001, and 9/11 is my date of birth.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just lots of like ups and downs. My degree from school was electrical, but somehow, I changed from electrical engineer to digital and social media marketing now. But yeah, that's what I do these days.
That's pretty awesome and epic, dude. So myself, I'm from Pakistan as well, and I moved out here back in 95. Long story, really long story. And it's just been fun just watching the internet grow as you see it, right? Social media has been, I mean, back in the days when I was working at this company, Web Visible, we focused on local media ads like Google ads and whatnot. And we even had a platform where people can manage their digital campaigns. So we're working in that company, and around that time, the CMO was talking about Facebook ads, and I was like, "What is Facebook ads?" Right? It was so brand new, like nobody had seen it, and now Facebook is one of the leading industries where people are buying and selling ads. And I think even now it's a lot cheaper than buying ads for other platforms.
Yeah.
Really, really fun. So you mentioned about, helping companies launch their Facebook or their ad strategy, their social media strategy to bring in traffic to their businesses, to bring in traffic to their products. So what are some of the top 10 things, like a small company that's just starting out, what's some of the What are the top 10 things that they should be doing right now?
Yeah, I think I'll kind of talk about a couple of those, that the mistakes that I'm seeing, small businesses or anyone making. Number one is, I don't think people, businesses, small or big, I don't think they're creating enough content.
Hmm.
I know, the content marketing and social and TikTok, everyone talks about these, but when I look at, small businesses, when you think of content, or in their mind, content means, hey, buy my product. Hey, it's 20% off, or Black Friday sale, or some
Mhm.
kind of sale or discount. So that's what they think, but they're missing out on, as consumers, we don't go to Facebook to buy things,
No.
right? As companies, so there's a big gap. As companies or brands, we want to sell on Facebook or social media, but as consumers, we don't go to Facebook to buy. I don't log into Facebook to buy shoes or glasses, or I'm there to connect to education, entertainment, right? So I think that's the number one mistake, or that I see people make, is content. When they think of content, they think that, hey, we have to sell something, let's create content that tells people how awesome our product is so they can buy it. But that's not the right approach, because people don't go to social media, Facebook or TikTok, just to buy stuff. So that's the number one thing. The mistake that people make is, your content needs to be educational, informational, and then it should solve people's problem, right? If you
Wow.
want to get
Yeah.
their attention. So that's the number one mistake. The second thing is, there are some people who realize, yeah, content and what type of content, but then they get into this place where they're looking at other people, and this happens a lot with either small businesses or like personal brands. So
Mhm.
what we do is, we look at other people. So we look at like Gary V's or Pat Flynn's or other influence, or even like brands like Starbucks, and we try to do what they are doing on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook. And what we don't realize is, we're at step number one, they're at like step number 1,000, right? So I always tell people, the best way to do content marketing is, do what's easy and natural for you is. And a lot of people talk about, do you find
Mhm.
yourself? It's the same thing. So that's the
Yeah.
second sort of mistake. First is not realizing what content marketing is. And second is, people make, or brands make, content marketing really difficult by trying to copy other people. And the third thing I would point out is, people don't realize platforms like Facebook, Instagram, even like LinkedIn, these are public companies, right?
Yeah.
So they make money when we spend ad dollars on those platforms, right? So if you want to, a lot of time people are like, hey, we're doing everything right. We're creating good content, we're creating good videos on Facebook, but no one is seeing our content. So they don't realize that these companies now, if you talk about organic reach, only the two platforms that have organic reach now is TikTok and LinkedIn. If
Yep.
you talk about more established platforms like Facebook or Instagram, organic reach is not the same as like 2015, 2016. So people don't realize how important paid advertising is. So it's
Mm.
not just about creating good content, educational content. Depending on your platform, you also have to invest in ads to make sure right people see your content and you get their attention, and then get them to take action. Those are the three things I see, the mistakes people make. And the number four I will add is, and it's specific to TikTok, that's how we kind of like started this conversation.
Mhm.
People still think, especially brands, they still think that TikTok is just for like teens or Gen Z, or it's just for like dances. But that's not true. I think you consume a lot of content on TikTok. I create a
Mhm.
lot of content on TikTok. So
Yeah.
I'm seeing more and more. If I go to my sort of like home feed, or the For You feed
The
on
For You feed.
TikTok,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm seeing almost like 80% of the content is people like me. It's people talking about marketing tips, or Instagram tips, or social media tips, or SEO tips, because that's the kind of content I create. That's the kind of
Mm.
content I consume, and TikTok knows that, right? So I want to kind of bring it back to the mistake businesses are making is they're not taking, in my opinion, TikTok seriously. It's growing. There's a lot of organic reach. And depending on obviously the nature of the business, I think businesses can benefit from TikTok a lot. So those are the four things I'll mention, the mistakes people are making.
No, those are excellent points, and I think one of the things that you mentioned about you got to have informational content, got to have informational and like personal information, not just personal, but something that relates to you on a deeper level. I think what that does is now you have a set of content that even people discovered you through an ad. They come to see your page, like, okay, this person if someone's real, I would definitely want to buy something from him or what is he teaching? Like I can say this pretty bluntly that I've purchased a few of Pat Flynn's courses. I did not know this man for a long time till I read about him in the book, Gary Vaynerchuk's book. And then even before that, I kind of had heard of him and I was like, I don't know if this is real. Right? It's like, wait, who is this man? But then the more I consume his content, the more I learn about him, the more I saw very many similarities. So that's so true.
Yeah.
And
if
then,
you, sorry, Janet, to cut you out.
yeah, go
If
ahead.
you pay attention to, or if you notice, and you probably have, you did notice, Pat's content, like 80% of that content is educational. Like he talks about, the passive income. He talks about building YouTube channel these days. He talks about, creating like podcasts, right? He talks about, doing, how do you create like podcasts? He's like educating people, and probably like 10 to 20% of his content is telling people, hey, go buy my stuff. Or, I do have products that you can buy. But
Yeah.
majority of his content is just to educate people, to help them, to inform them.
Yeah, and he is creating a ton of content for sure. And when Gary put out that content book, the content strategy of 64 pieces of content out of one piece of content, or 264 contents a day, people just went nuts. Like, how can you create so many pieces of content? And then if you look deeper into it, it's not that hard. He's just taking screenshots of this, putting it up there, making it 3 times. That's 3 pieces of content. But people just blow up like, wait, I'm having trouble creating like 2 pieces of content one day, right? People are thinking about that. So that's really powerful. I mean, that's something that people are not realizing. And again, mentioning about people are not, and you're right. Like anytime I post the content about, hey, this is what we did last week with my kids, it gets tons more likes than, and if I talk about like, hey, I'm learning this, blah, blah, blah. I mean, surely I have trouble asking for money on any social media, talking about, what I'm doing, what courses that I'm creating. But really good point. I mean, I definitely need to step up my game and put more pieces of content out there.
Yeah, and one thing I'll mention. So I saw that Gary's. A lot of people look at that. How do you like 60, 100 pieces of content in a day? Like that's like, what do you do? It's funny. So my brother is an architect, and he works at a company, and they were like, we can't. So this creating content looks like full-time job, right? And I'm like, it is. And if you kind of like think about the way everything is changing, evolving, right? So every business is going online, right? So how do you stand out for online? Is through content, right?
Yeah.
And kind of my perspective is, obviously, it looks really crazy. It looks really difficult. It looks really overwhelming to start from like 60 pieces of content. So to me, I think the most important thing is consistency. So if someone's like, hey, I cannot do 60 or even in a week, but I can probably do like one a day, one every other day. So I'll be like, do that, start from that point, but then commit to being consistent over a long period of time. Because, nothing kind of works without consistency. The example I give people there is going to the gym. So if I go to the gym like one day and I do like the perfect like bicep curl, it's perfect, the perfect weight, perfect form, everything is perfect. But I never go back again. Guess what? Nothing's gonna happen, right? So it's about the consistency of showing up. So the same thing I tell people, do what you can with what you have right now. You don't even need like fancy tools. This tool is enough.
That's all you need. Yeah.
Yeah, this is all you need. But try to be consistent, and then slowly, obviously, do more and more and more.
All right. So, personal question. I've got a podcast that I started, right? The one that we're on. about 2 years, over 2 years ago.
Mhm.
I didn't market the podcast at all the first year because I was just creating content to document the journey as a beekeeper.
Mhm.
And then I started bringing in guests because I wanted to learn more about what is everybody else doing? Like, how did they go from side hustle to main hustle? How did they bring in, money? How are they sustaining through podcasting? And you've got a great point. 80% of what Pat Flynn's doing, he's teaching.
Mhm.
20% is he's like, hey, I've got a product here. Go support these guys. Go, he's helping a lot of people.
Mhm.
So how do I am putting my podcast out every week, right? Every Thursday, there's a new episode out with a
Mhm.
guest.
Mhm.
But do I market my podcast every day? Like, what strategy do I need to go?
Man,
Pat
that's it.
mentions,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Pat mentions I got to send an email out every time I have a new episode out. I'm struggling on emailing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be
So
guests on other podcasts, but yeah, give me a little rundown.
yes, a couple of things come to mind. Such a good question because so many people have, like, I started my YouTube channel. A lot of people are starting either YouTube channel or podcast, but then they're like, how do we market? How do we bring people to it? One thing a couple of things to think about.
Mhm.
Uh, what's the goal of this podcast? Meaning, do you want to sell a product, a digital product, or are you selling like services, right?
Mhm.
Meaning, do you want people to eventually, obviously the purpose of the podcast is to create content, educate people, but once you educate people, then it builds your personal brand. And when it builds your personal brand, they want to, for different solutions, they want to come back to you.
Yeah.
But and maybe you already have figured out that is it a product that you want to sell, is it a service you want to sell, or you want to just build your reputation or personal brand, right? So that's the first thing that I'll try to kind of like answer if I'm doing the strategy. The other
Yeah.
thing is, let's say, just for the sake of example, let's say you do want to sell services, right? So maybe you're running, some people do like podcast production for other people, some people do like digital solution or some type of services. The way I would look at podcasts is, so in that case, so if you're selling services
Mhm. Yep.
and you're using like podcast as a channel, so technically you're in B2B business, right? So you're
Yeah.
selling services to other business owner. So what I would do is make a list of like 50 or 100 people that can potentially work with you, and then one by one invite them on the podcast. Because in this sort of example, we don't need numbers, or we don't need like 10,000 100,000 listeners, but we do need to talk or connect or network with the right people, so they trust us, there's a relationship, and then we can easily sell them our services, right? So what I would do is invite those two 50 or 100 people, one by one, make them on the podcast. There's no selling, make them look
Right.
good, make them the center of the story, right? And then afterwards, it's just sort of like promote the podcast on all of your social channel. If you have an email list, do that. But then in this example, the goal of the podcast is not to bring mass views or listeners. The goal is to build like deep relationship with the 50 or 100 people, so we can sell our services to like 10 or 15 of those, right? So in this example, I would probably share it on your social. You do have to, once the podcast is published, one kind of like a challenge with the audio platform is, like, podcast is, the discoverability is not good. So people do, like, YouTube is a search first platform. Like, people go to YouTube and search for different things, right? But people don't necessarily go to podcasts and searching for, hey, how do I, what mic do I pick for my podcast, or how do I create my TikTok, or how do I do XYZ? So for that, if you don't have an audience on another channel, it's the podcast audience is very slow to build.
Slow to build and grow. Okay.
Yeah, but whether you do it yourself in the beginning, or you do it, maybe you hire an assistant or like a VA or outsource it. But in this example of like B2B sort of podcast, once the podcast goes, live, I would definitely take like 2 or 3 snippets, share those snippets on different social media platform, whichever one you're active on. In this example, B2B, we got to be on LinkedIn.
Right.
And I would tag the person who was on
As a guest, yeah,
as a
tag them.
guest, right?
Mhm.
But also think about who else is relevant to that.
Mm,
Meaning, let's say you had me on your show and I'm talking about TikTok and using TikTok for the business, right? And you take if the podcast goes like, we take a 2-minute snippet, we put it on LinkedIn, you tag me, but then also think about who else is relevant person that in your network who also cares about like TikTok, and also tag 2 or 3 of those people.
yeah.
So basically, you're making the guest look good, building a relationship with them, and then obviously on the back end, it's always like, hey, what do you do? What do you do? So it's sort of like networking, right? So
Yeah,
that's kind of like
absolutely.
one thought that I have. The other is, let's say, if the goal of the podcast is like Pat Flynn to sell digital products, then we do need more views. We
Mm,
do need more, listeners, because we have like a course that we want to sell. So let's say if that's your goal, then I would do it. Podcast itself does not have a lot of like discoverability, a lot of like
yeah,
reach, right?
yeah.
So what I would do is, pick a channel that has a lot of organic reach, and two comes to mind: TikTok, right?
TikTok and LinkedIn, yeah.
Actually, surprisingly, the other one right now, as the time of recording this, is Instagram Reels.
Oh yes, the
Instagram
reels is
Reels has a
huge.
lot of
Yeah,
organic reach. Yeah. So what I would do is, in this case, after the podcast goes live, take the snippets, like 15-second snippets, and then put those on TikTok and Instagram Reels. But in this case, I would invite people on my show who has 10 times the audience of the 10 times the audience that I have on TikTok and Instagram Reels.
oh
You know
yes,
why, right? Because
yes.
they will
They'll
share the
promote it
stuff
on.
and I'll get to access to their audience, right? But going back to, I think it's really important. Those are two different, the first example, we were trying to sell, a service, and our goal was to connect with the CEOs or CMOs or decision makers. So in my opinion, we're not looking for like the number of, downloads. That's not the metric I would go after.
Right.
I would go after the quality of people I'm getting on my podcast. In the second example, we need more eyeballs. We need like more reviews. We need more like, listeners, right? Because we
Hmm.
want to sell like digital product. In that example, I would definitely find a way to, one, have people who are influential on the podcast,
Yeah.
tag them, share them, get them to share it. In some cases, what some people do, they create like small snippets of podcasts or interviews, and they send it to the guest
Hmm.
afterwards. So
Like, hey
guests
there.
can publish that, because it's kind of like, hey, we were like, hey, you were a guest on my show, would you mind sharing? That's one thing. But if you actually also send them the assets,
Yeah.
you're making their
Makes it
job
so
easier.
much easier. Yeah.
But in this example, probably in both too, I would definitely focus on find a way to build an email list with the podcast.
No,
Right?
great. These are awesome. And wow. And I've been seeing recurrence of this, and I've seen what Pathland's doing. I see what everyone is doing around this area. Not a lot of people are putting podcasts on YouTube. I mean, sure, there's video podcasting, but I don't know what kind of traffic that's going to drive, because unless you are the big guys like,
Joe Rogan.
yeah, Joe Rogan, right? Nobody's going to come watch a 2 hour long podcast episode.
Yeah. Two things I'll mention, Junaid, real quick. So
Mhm.
one is from the conversation that we just had.
Yeah.
There's so many things, right? So in my 5 minutes, I probably listed down, if you made a list, like there's like 15 action items, right?
There's a ton of, yep.
Emails,
Mhm.
Instagram Reels, and TikTok, or YouTube, or LinkedIn, or snippets. I would not do all of them at the same time.
Right.
I would only pick one or maybe like two. And obviously, my rule is do what's easy for you, but something that you can do consistently.
Yep.
People like Pat Flynn, Gary Vee, they have teams now.
They've got
right?
teams.
So they can afford to do a bunch of stuff at the same time. So I
Mhm.
would pick like one or two activities that can produce the biggest bang for my buck, right?
Yeah.
I have YouTube, I don't have podcasts. I have an email list, but I don't send emails,
Mhm.
right? So I kind of like, I pick the games I want to play. I pick the games I want to play, and I can win, instead of being like all everywhere. So,
Right.
yeah. And eventually, as I put more focus, as things change, as I grow my team, there will be more and more things. I used to be super active on Quora. I'm
Mhm.
not now, right? I used to
Yep.
be very active on LinkedIn. Now, not that much. Now my
Mhm.
main channels are like TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube. Like 6 months ago, it was different. So
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of, once you understand what the goal is and what channel you're using, podcast or YouTube, then make a list of all the things that you could do, but then pick like one or two or three that you can easily do, but
Nice.
do it
Yeah.
consistently, because consistency is something that's going to produce the result. So that's the first thing I was going to say, and I forgot about the second one. It might come back.
Awesome. I really like it. I mean, you got content consistency over a long period of time, and
Yeah,
you're gonna have those results. And then, of course, having a focus on what do I want to get out of the podcast. I mean,
yeah,
and you're absolutely right. My main mission is to, number one, connect with the guest on a deeper level, and we definitely have connected on a deeper level, understanding, where you come from, your background, and my background, and having that connection. I think it really it's been like, I've mentioned this on many episodes before. Like, this is my favorite part of all the things that I do. Right. Then I do have a VA. I do have a little bit of team that's helping me with promoting the podcast. So far, I've been posting it inside my own groups. I don't know if that's helping, but
yeah,
on Facebook pages, and there's some activity on LinkedIn that we're building up. But yeah, over time we're getting there. So we have all those snippets. We have those carousels. But reels, that's a really good point. I think even Pat mentioned, this is something he did for like 10 days straight, just putting Instagram reels up there, and how much more traffic he was able to generate.
yeah. And one other thing I'll mention, and this is my personal perspective. I don't have a podcast right now. It's on my list. It's on my to do
Hmm.
in future maybe. One mistake, not mistake, but I think it's sort of like different tactic. Most of the podcasts that you look at, um, they're kind of like stories, right? So even
Hmm.
like this right here, I shared my story, like my
Yeah.
background, your background, so how I, became what I do today. If you, especially in the beginning, when we're not like Gary Vee's or Pat Flynn's or Joe Rogan or Lewis House, people
Hmm.
don't really, people care less about our stories. People care more about the problems they have and the solution they're looking for, right? And
That's so true.
the reason I say that is most of the people who put their podcasts on YouTube, the titles they use is sort of like, social media marketing with Ali Mirza, or,
Hmm.
you know, interview with Ali Mirza. But the thing
Yeah.
is, no one really cares about
No.
Ali's story. What people care about is, hey, how do I grow on Instagram? How do I make my email list grow? How do I, get 10%, 10x ROI on Facebook? So I think coming back to, especially in the beginning, if I have a podcast, instead of making it story based, I'll make it the education based, right? So what are the
Hmm.
problems? So for example, instead of having, let's talk social media strategies with Ali, we can say the 5 steps small businesses can take to grow on TikTok with Ali Mirza. So
Yeah.
the second part is, it tells who the guest is. The first
Yeah.
part is something that people might be searching for, right? The best way
Absolutely.
to research Instagram hashtags with XYZ person, right? So
Hmm.
that's the kind of like, I think the small, in the beginning of any like podcaster or any sort of show, I will make there's a lot of to be said about telling story. I'm a huge fan of like storytelling, right? But I
Yeah.
think especially when the numbers are small, and if you want to leverage YouTube, see if you can make it more search based, and the things, talk about the things that people are actually struggling with,
No,
if
I
that makes
think
sense.
I think that's an excellent point. And a lot of the times, like, actually, all of my episode titles start with a how to blah 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 blah. How to learn, how do you grow, how do you use this for that, and But I do start with episode number, the name of the guest, and then how to title.
Mhm.
But I could flip it around where they see the how to title first,
Yeah.
and then they're like, okay, this is the person I'm talking to. To
Yep.
make, I mean, I could go back and do that. I mean, I've got a VA, but I'm also posting every single episode on a website as well. So it's kind of like driving traffic to SEO, blah, blah, blah. We're putting the entire transcript of the episode on there as well. So it's text, there's text heavy. Again, there's a ton of things to do, right? You can only get away with so many. But
Yep.
again, I think in time, just having that consistency is going to play out over time.
Yeah, one thing I'll mention, I mean, like I said, I don't do podcasts. I don't send emails. I don't do Quora. I don't do SEO. I don't even write blog articles, right? So I think one thing I'll mention to people listening, don't feel when you pick what you want to, compete or kind of like pick your battle, don't feel bad.
Yeah.
I'm not, I decided not to do podcasts, right? That's my decision. I decided I was active on Quora. Quora was bringing me a lot of traffic, but now the things changed. So the strategy changed, right? So don't feel, I think it goes back to, make a list of everything, but then don't try to do everything.
Yeah. You got to pick which one's easy to do. Like you mentioned, what's easy to do, what's, easily accomplish before you say, oh, I want to do all these 10 things. Like one of my great friends who was on LinkedIn, she's like, LinkedIn's not doing for me. I'm not going to hang out on LinkedIn anymore. So she closed off her account. She's now solely focused on TikTok, and she's got a good number of followership, and she's even brought a whole bunch of guests through TikTok. She's the host of Unconventional Leaders. I don't know if you've heard of her before, Heather Parody. She's amazing. She's doing some really awesome things. Well, Ali, thank you so much. This has been so much fun, and I feel that I'm on edge. Like the way I'm talking, it's crazy. But I'm just super excited to be able to talk to you and bring you and talk, learn these awesome tips that you've shared with us. I do have some questions that I ask my guests towards the end of the episode.
Let's go.
So, all right, let's get started.
Yeah.
What is the one hobby that you wish you got into?
So actually, it's content. I think I started my business back in. Oh, am I supposed to be brief for this question or?
No, you can go.
So when I started my business back in 2015, 2016. So I focused a lot on the services. So I was speaking at local events, getting clients, doing services, making money, and it was good, right? Because I was making a lot of clients came and I made money, but I was not really creating content for me, under my name or creating my personal brand. So I think that was the mistake, which I do now. I made a decision this year, at the beginning of this year, to create, take my TikTok and YouTube more seriously and put more focus on building my personal brand. But I think that's and the reason, I know you asked about like hobby, to me, content creation is a hobby.
Absolutely.
So I wish I got into this sooner because I think it's as we're sort of a hobby and hustle, right? So whenever we saw like a hobby business, right? So especially digital business, or if you're doing the services, marketing, SEO, building apps, obviously when we start, we need clients, right? So we go after people. But I think the goal should be to get to a point where clients come to us, right? And then personal brand reputation, that allows you to get to that point. And I think that's why content creation and building a personal brand is huge. And I wish I did this sooner.
Nice. I love that answer. I mean, now that everybody's heard that content creation is a hobby, everybody is going to answer the same question. I wish I was doing this more. But each one of us take a different journey, and like the way our human mind works, and it's just beautiful just to see that process. Like I love going back in time and think, oh, what was I doing at this time? How do I get to this point? Like how did I come to create this studio of this proportion? Like I had no desire to have something like this last year, right? So it all just comes together when we are ready.
Junaid, one thing I'll share quickly. A lot of people, so how mostly people in the digital space, how like information overload, and we read a lot of articles and podcasts and interviews, and it becomes like we kind of consume a lot of content, and then it kind of takes space in our brain. I'm no different. I did the same thing. I still do the same thing. I think I consume a lot more. But what's funny is when I started creating content, a lot of, if you go back to my, my TikTok and watch some of my content, most of these are like small tips. Hey, how do you do XYZ? This is how I did it. So what I started doing was, as I was like consuming content, I kind of like promised myself, hey, for everything I consume, I'm going to try to produce something. So when I started doing that, it did two things. One, it helped me create content easily. And two, it kind of created some space in my mind that, hey, I did something with the information. I did something with the consumption, all the new things I learned.
Yeah.
So I think that was like game changer for me, not just in the sense that it built my personal brand, but also it was an outlet for me to share what I was learning, and I think it made me more productive.
No, absolutely. I think that's an excellent point, because when you tell your subconscious, hey, this is what I got to do every time I consume 10 videos, I got to create one video. Or every time I consume 15 videos, I got to create one video. That tells you like, hey, time's up, buddy. Let's do it.
Yep.
Awesome. I like it. What did you want to be when you were a child?
Ooh. Actually, I don't remember.
Okay.
But I was my background, my family was a family of engineers. So that's what I did. My first degree was electrical from school, but I played a lot of cricket. I played a lot of soccer, but I don't think I had the clarity in my mind to have a goal as far as, hey, I want to become this when I grow up.
Yeah. No, that's so true. For the longest time, I remember that I wanted to be a pilot, like an airplane pilot. But somewhere along the way, what happened is I got introduced to computers, and the rest is history.
Wow. Yeah.
Like when I first moved to the California or the US, I picked apart a computer and combined like two computer pieces together into one, because I was just so fascinated by these. I spent hours, and my uncle would be calling me, like, come for dinner. I'm like, no, I'm building this computer right now.
Yeah.
It's so funny. Next question. What is your favorite movie or TV show?
So I don't watch TVs other than sports. So I watch all the NBAs and NFL, especially the playoffs, because that's when the fun starts.
That's the fun starts, yeah.
And movie, I don't really have like a favorite movie, but I do, as far as the genre, I like horror, and I like drama. So those are the two. But I don't really have like a one favorite like movie.
Okay.
I don't even like the other kind of like interesting or thing about me is if I watch a movie once, I don't watch it again.
Yeah.
So I never watch and maybe I watched it like 10 years ago and I don't even remember what happened. And I know there are people who will watch, Matrix or whatever, their favorite Harry Potter, like their favorite movie, like 10 times. I never watch a movie again.
Because you already consumed it, you understand what was to take from it.
Yeah, or to me, like if I'm watching it again, I know like what's gonna happen, right? Even if I watched it like a while ago, I know that this is the next thing, and I like to keep it. To me, like if I'm watching a movie, like I want to keep it suspense, right? I don't want to know like what's coming next.
You want that uncertainty, like Tony Robbins mentioned, right?
Yep.
All right. Well, this question is going to be interesting for you. I mean, since you don't watch a lot of movies, but you might have watched one that you liked. So, what movie would you choose if you got to play a character in it?
Ooh, so that's an interesting question. I recently watched a movie where actually on the plane, I'm going blank on the name. It was actually The Legend. So Will Smith, I don't know if you've seen it. So it's it kind of like in the world is crashing down and he is the only person alive.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the plot of the movie. And that's the movie I would play because it was so much fun. Him just by himself trying to figure everything out. Because I think it was the virus takeover and it killed like everyone. And he's the only person alive with his dog. So I think that kind of like, it seems interesting, figuring out like, he was able to find people. There were other people. He thought
Yeah,
he
he
was
was
the
able
only
to
one, but
find him.
towards the end, he did find other people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that seems interesting to me right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's my kids jumping in. All right, next question. Who is your favorite superhero or superhero power?
Big fan of Superman, and I don't know why. It's just I think that's one of the cartoons I watched a lot when I was growing up. So that's like, if someone offered me, I would say, make me the Superman.
Nice, I like it. All right, last question.
Uh,
If you were a board game, what would it be?
Ooh, I never played actually board games as much, so I'll take a pass. Most of the interesting things that I was growing up, I always preferred being outside. So I wanted to go out, play soccer. I wanted to be out, especially growing up in Pakistan, cricket was big, still big, right? So I wanted to play cricket. That's why I never got really big into like playing video games or like watching movies or TV shows, because I always wanted to go out and, be outside and play games.
That's so awesome. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, when I was growing up in Saudi, I used to play, cricket, soccer, and basically be outside because number one, we didn't have a lot of television stations to watch, and I just got into movies somewhere around my life. Like it was just exciting to consume content in that way, and that basically took me to another to a path of being a film producer and producing films and short films. So that's what I've done in the past few years, and it's been super exciting. And combining that knowledge into podcasting, into all the things that I'm doing now, has been super exciting. As a user experience designer, that's my main gig. It's fun to see how the little parts inside everything work together. So really cool. So Ali, we know we can find you on TikTok and on Instagram and all the social media. So we'll make sure to plug those into the bottom of the podcast show notes. Is there one specific place that you like people to find you more than others?
So I'm actually TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. That's the channels those are like the top of my list these days. And now I am at Ali Mirza 2K on all of those, and I'm sure we'll link those up. But yeah, you can find me on those channels. Send me a DM, send me a message. I'm always on social media doing interesting stuff.
Well, thank you so much, Ali. This was a ton of fun. We'll be sure to let you know when the episode goes live. Thank you so much for your time and the amazing tips. We'll definitely keep in touch. Thanks again so much.
Thanks for having me.
Congratulations, you made it to the end of the episode. Thanks so much for listening to our guest on this episode. Please send me an email at junaid@hacksandhobbies.com to tell me what you loved about our guest today. You could find links mentioned in this episode on the hacksandhobbies.com website.